Thomas slows to a stop in the road. He takes a moment and breathes in the heavy October air. After deliberating for a few minutes, he sways and turns around. He feels the damp grass through the soles of his shoes. This time, as Thomas approaches the door, he does not bother to avoid crossing the lawn. As Thomas reaches the porch, he considers whether he should take the same approach. He decides that 3 strong knocks work well, and he lifts his fist up to the looming door. Knock, knock. As Thomas pulls his arm back to knock a 3rd time, the door creaks open. Everything was silent. There were dim lights inside, and Thomas felt uncomfortable with the scene before him. He swallows his nerves and steps inside. "Hello?" Thomas calls out. "Is anyone home?" "I was wondering if I could use your phone." His voice echoes back to him through the dark house. Thomas turns to peer into the kitchen when suddenly he hears a voice over his shoulder. The phone is in the steady. The voice is deep and raspy. Thomas turns to meet the figure, only to see an outline in the dark. The man steps forward slowly. With every looming inch that closes between them, Thomas makes out more details of the man. He is a tall figure and quite skinny, Thomas thought. "The phone is in the steady," the man spoke once again. As he did, he lifted his hand and pointed down the dimly lit hallway. Thomas nodded his head. "Thank you, sir," Thomas said. Thomas began to walk down the hall. The wooden floor moaned beneath his feet, and he imagined that the house was alive, just the same as him. He wondered what it would feel like to be stuck with the tall man. As Thomas reached the end of the hallway, he noticed that there were rooms to both his left and his right. He stood still for a moment, but was startled by the raspy voice that echoed behind him. "Left," it said. "Left to the steady." Thomas shouted back, "Thank you, sir." Thomas turned to his left and he stepped into the steady. To his surprise, the steady seemed quite normal. In fact, the lighting was pleasant and he found the aesthetic to be quite charming. He soon noticed a rotary phone, which sat on the oak desk in the center of the room. He approached the phone and lifted the receiver to his ear. Thomas waited to hear the dial tone. There was nothing, just silence. How strange, Thomas thought to himself. There must be something wrong. He pressed down on the plunger to reset the phone, but there was still no dial tone. Thomas stepped back from the phone and followed the cord underneath the desk. It was dark, so he ran his hand along the cord until he reached the end. He picked up the end of the cord and pulled it out into the light. When he sat down to examine it, he found that the cord had been sliced through. Thomas felt his heartbeat quicken, and he slowly rose up to standing position. He creeped towards the door and peered down the hall. The man was nowhere to be seen, but Thomas had a feeling that he needed to leave. As he stepped out into the hall, the floorboards moaned beneath him, once again. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. They were heavy, and he knew that they weren't his. Without even taking a second to deliberate, Thomas bolted for the front door and ran out into the street. The very second that his feet met the pavement, he took off down the road, determined to find his friend. Go to episode 6.